The first key intangible asset risk is the fact that most companies constantly leak valuable intangible assets. There are three main avenues for these leaks: via customers, suppliers, and employees. And the leakage of confidential information via these channels results in constant loss of competitive advantage and ultimately market share and margin erosion. A good example of this is a company we dealt with recently. The company was an award-winning hardware manufacturer. They were growing very fast, and the CEO had committed them to a tight product delivery date. Unfortunately, the software team was simply unable to deliver to that date. To solve the problem, they contracted an automotive software engineering firm in a different jurisdiction as an outsourced developer to deliver the product. The good news was that the product was ultimately delivered on time and on budget. The bad news was that the company didn't realize that during the development process, a medium-level software engineer within the firm had transferred the entire codebase over to the outsourced developer. When it came to deliver the next iteration of the product, the outsourced developer had disappeared. They turned up 6 months later as a primary competitor to the first company, utilizing all of the software code that they had gained access to. The competitor ultimately undercut and beat the original company in the market, costing the first company over $150 million in lost revenue in 2 years alone. It was a very salutary lesson that your most valuable assets are likely to be intangible, yet being intangible, they're often ignored or overlooked. If you don't treat them as valuable assets, eventually they will leak outside your company and your control. The good news is that if your company is faced with the problem of constant leakage of intangible assets, then the steps required to solve the problem are relatively simple. First, you actually need to identify what your intangible assets are. Most companies don't identify their intangible assets at all. They're unable to figure out which assets are truly critical and which ones are not. Once you've identified which are the truly critical assets, then you're able to take steps to ensure that those assets don't leak outside the company. What particular steps you take will depend upon the nature of the asset itself. However, the first step is in knowing what assets are valuable and important at all. Once you understand what those assets are, you can then take steps to stop them from leaking.